There's a new study out that shows that the percentage of calories coming in your child's diet that are coming from ultra processed foods is enormous. And that number keeps getting higher with every passing year. And guess what else is going up? The rate of obesity among children as well. So, we're going to be talking about that here today when I am joined by two experts who know an awful lot about that. First, we are joined by a weight loss expert. She is now an author and she is a doctor at the Barnard Medical Center. With that, we welcome Dr. Vanita Rahman to the show. Dr. Rahman, thank you so very much for being here.
Thanks, Chuck.
And right in the middle of your screen, you also see someone who not only happens to be a wonderful dietitian at the BMC, but she's also a certified diabetes educator, and she happens to be one of the top 1% of all female marathoners at the Boston Marathon. Karen Smith, welcome back to the exam room.
Thanks, Chuck. Glad to be here.
You can run circles around me, Karen Smith. I'm not going to lie to you. Top 1%, that is nothing to shake a stick at, as my grandmother would say.
Thanks.
Well, hold on. Let's not be humble now. I mean,
I don't know if I could claim that now, but back in my day, yes.
What was your time?
My best was 2:58.
Dr. Rahman, can you run a 2:58 marathon?
And I couldn't qualify for a marathon.
Oh my goodness gracious, that is fantastic! Congratulations. Okay. Let's talk about this study because this is something that is really interesting to me. And Dr. Rahman, when you sent me this email, I remember being both equal parts sad and excited by this because I think back to what it was that I was eating as a child. And obviously I became severely overweight in my childhood and then into adulthood as well. And then when you see a study like this, it's really alarming that the majority of kids now are headed in this direction. So how big of a problem is this?
This is a big problem. We've known for a while childhood obesity rates are rising, and we know that nutrition is playing a key role. And that's why it's really helpful when we have research like this that's published. This one came out of Tufts showing that, it really is the food, and we need to help our youth eat better because this can be reversed. We just need to give them the right foods to eat.
And Karen, as a mother yourself, again, what is just your reaction to a study like this?
Oh, it's really just heartbreaking. I think I shared that, literally and figuratively, because these kids are just not starting off on a great foot. And it's hard, the older you get to lose weight, and 75 to 80% of obese children will, go into adulthood with weight to lose and continue to be obese. And so that's just really sad because apart from the other health risks that are associated with carrying excess weight, as a child, as an adolescent, a teenager, the emotional struggles that kids go through then with having that excess weight. It's just really sad. And so like Dr. Rahman said, there's a lot that we can take from this to improve what our kids are eating and help them move in a better direction.
All right, Dr. Rahman, I know that you have some slides prepared so that we can actually dive into the science of this study. So here's the deal. If you're listening to this on the podcast, in the episode notes, you will find a link to watch this very video on both YouTube and Facebook if you would like to see the science in front of you as we discuss this. If not, you're going to hear plenty about it here on the podcast as well. So Dr. Rahman, let's go ahead and pull up the screen. And now here you see it right there. Dr. Rahman, let's go ahead and walk through this important study.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is a study about the amount of ultra-processed foods that the youth are consuming in the U.S. So let's just jump right in. First of all, we know that the rates of childhood obesity are rising just as they are in adults, but the numbers really are alarming where when we look at preschool age children that are ages 2 through 5, nearly 14% are obese. I mean, imagine that. These are very young kids, and they're already setting on a path of obesity. And then when we look at school age children, ages 6 through 11, 18.4% of them are obese. And then as we move into teenagers, ages 12 through 19, nearly 21% are obese. And as we heard Karen say, this is very, very concerning because children who start out with obesity are likely to stay obese through adulthood.
And Karen, let me actually ask you a question here. Is it more likely that a child would be continue to have obesity into adulthood if they establish that earlier in life? So, say a child who's 5 years old and already has obesity is X times more likely to be obese as an adult.
That's a great question, Chuck. And I'm not sure that there are studies. I certainly don't know the answer to that. Like, I would imagine that, if you're able to, like the earlier that you're able to correct that. So if a child starts out obese at 5, but you're able to help that child and, by improving their diet at age 7, right? Like, that's a really good thing. I think the sooner that you're able to correct the dietary patterns of kids, the better. But I'm not sure that there is any research looking at, that question that you just asked of like, what is the age where, you're most likely to stay obese into adulthood, or if that is harder. I would think that it's just the sooner that you're able to intervene, the better.
Yeah, I would be inclined to agree with you, even if the studies aren't there. My hypothesis is simply that the longer you have a habit, the harder it becomes to break. So you're talking about early intervention there with healthy eating. I think that if you establish that pattern earlier in life, it's going to be much easier as the child ages into adulthood. But Dr. Rahman, let's talk now about the trends in obesity, generally speaking here. What are we seeing right now?
Yeah, so we've known that the trend for adults has been increasing rates of obesity. So at the turn of the century, about a third of American adults were obese, and now we know it's actually even higher than what we're seeing here. It's over 42% of adults are obese. And then this is paralleling the trend that we're seeing in children, where at the turn of the century, about 14% were obese, and now it's nearly 20% are obese. So really quite striking. The two sort of go hand in hand.
What do you think is driving this trend? Is it the ultra processed foods? I see the study that's up there on the screen right now, and it's a great study. We're going to link off to that. You can see that in the show description or in the episode notes as well if you would like to read this in full. But how much of this is really attributable to the ultra processed foods, Dr. Rahman?
I think quite a bit. What we know is children's diet has changed, just as it has for adults. People are eating more processed foods, and which are problematic for many reasons. They have a higher caloric density that leads to weight gain. So it's really a combination of things, but clearly the diet and processed food is playing a key role in all of this.
And Karen, when somebody comes to you and you're reviewing their menu, are they generally surprised when they actually see on paper how many processed foods they're consuming on a typical day?
I think it depends on the person, Chuck. Sometimes people are really aware and come to me knowing that they want to change, and they're aware that what they're consuming isn't healthy, and that there are a lot of processed foods on their daily menu. And other people are quite surprised. Some people come in thinking that they're eating a healthy diet, and when it's all written on paper and in front of them for them to see and review, it becomes more clear that not only are they consuming a lot of processed foods, but I think more shockingly is what they're not consuming. Very few people are consuming fruits and vegetables on a daily basis.
And that's certainly a fact that is backed up by this study. So Dr. Rahman, can you walk us through it?
Yeah, so this is just a great research group out of Tufts, and they really do terrific research into food, nutrition, and chronic disease. So what this group did was, this study was just published in JAMA about 2 weeks ago, and they looked at the rates of consumption of ultra-processed foods. So not even processed, but ultra-processed foods, meaning foods that are really very highly processed from their original forms among youth in the US, ages 2 through 19. And they compared those data from 1999 to 2018. And let's go through what they found. Well, first, they examined the dietary habits of nearly 34,000 children in the US. So a very large study. And what they found, this is really startling. So what they did was they looked at the percentage of daily calories from different food groups. So, Karen just mentioned people not eating enough fruits and vegetables. And we see that here, that children in the US in 1999 were getting just about 4% of their calories from fruits. And sadly, that didn't change much over the next 2 decades, where it's only 4.8%. So we know fruits are just chock full of nutrients, so healthy for us. And our kids are only getting about 5% of their calories from them. And then, I leave this last column here for people who love statistics, but the rest of us can ignore it. And then we look at vegetables, again, really full of nutrients. And look at these really dismal numbers. Less than 2% of calories are from vegetables, and that's gone down even more to 1.3%. So really low intake of produce. And then when we look at grains, 7.7% of calories from grains, and that's decreased even more to 4.5%. And as if these numbers were not bad enough, let's look at the last group there, nuts, seeds, and legumes. And we know legumes are full of nutrients, right? And less than 1% at the turn of the century, 0.9% of calories from legumes. And now it's about 1%. So again, really low intake of these healthy plant-based foods. So if the kids aren't eating these healthy plant-based foods, what are they eating? Well, they're eating a lot of processed food. So we see that ready to heat or ready to eat meal consumption has gone up, from 2.2% of total calories to now 11%. So about a tenth of the calories are coming from these pre-prepared meals, sort of ready to go from the freezer to the microwave or the can to the microwave. And the other big contributor here is sweet snacks and sweets. So, all those sugar sweetened treats that are out there, whether they're cookies or baked goods or just packaged chocolates or candies, they're accounting for over 12% of the calories that kids are eating. So really a startling number. And then we look at fast food. Children were eating about 6% of their calories from fast food at the turn of the century. It's gone up a little bit more. But again, we know that fast food is not always the healthiest option. And then if you take all the processed foods that are out there, all the ultra processed foods, we see that kids at the turn of the century were eating about 61% of their calories from ultra processed food, and that has jumped to 67%. So over 2/3 of their calories are coming from these ultra processed foods. And that is no doubt contributing to the rising rates of obesity that we're seeing in children.
Yeah, let's leave that chart up there for a second and talk a little bit more about this. Karen, I want to come to you because we see that explosion in the rate of calories that are being consumed from ready to heat and eat meals. And in the press release that was sent out that I received with this particular study, it said that the majority of the biggest jump in that particular category came from frozen pizza and frozen hamburgers, of all things, over the last decade, or 2 decades, I should say. Just extraordinary. Simple question here to you, Karen. How unhealthy, really, in terms of overall health and calories and fat and all of that, are these super easy, just throw them in the microwave and 2.5 minutes later, you got a meal kind of deal?
Really unhealthy, Chuck. I mean, they're foods that are basically supplying calories and fat and a whole lot of salt to kids and cholesterol, but don't come packaged with a lot of nutrients, things like vitamins and minerals, vitamin C, potassium, and certainly they don't come packaged with fiber, which is, of course, found in whole plant foods. Specifically in those foods that Dr. Rahman mentioned, kids are not consuming fruits, vegetables, whole grains, legumes, nuts, and seeds. And, it's just really, it's just sad to me to see that kids are consuming these foods that are supplying them calories without the nutrients to help their bodies run efficiently, run optimally, to fuel their education, to fuel their sports performance, and certainly not fuel the good, healthy probiotic bacteria that we want to be feeding with high fiber foods, which ultimately can lead to increased inflammation and chronic disease down the road.
And Dr. Rahman, let me come to you here and talk specifically about frozen pizza. I know that there is a notion among some dietitians and nutritionists out there that has said that pizza is one of the healthiest foods that anybody can eat because it encompasses all of the food groups. What would your message be to a parent who is thinking about that and has stocked up their freezer with frozen pizzas?
Yeah, so let's step back and pizza could be healthy if it's made with healthy ingredients. So if it's a whole grain crust with a low fat tomato sauce and packed full of vegetables, then sure, that's a healthy pizza.
I don't think that that's the pizza these guys were talking about, to be honest with you.
And you're right. I don't think so either. This is going to be a frozen pizza made with refined grains, a high fat sauce, lots of cheese, and most likely instead of vegetables, there's probably processed meat on there, which we know is a type of carcinogen that's common amongst youth intake. So really, I would encourage parents to really educate themselves, learn more, so that when they bring these foods in, they have a better sense of what they're bringing in, because it is possible to feed our kids healthy pizza, but not the ones that are commonly available in the grocery store.
I believe up on our website, pcrm.org/recipes, there are a number of recipes up there for healthier pizzas, which are absolutely delicious. I will personally vouch for them. And I know that you also have a cookbook coming out, Dr. Rahman. So is there a pizza recipe in there, perhaps?
And not in this one,
Okay.
but there are lots of other great recipes in there. There's a great tomato sauce recipe and lots of other pastas and fun food for kids to enjoy.
Outstanding. All right, we will talk more about that book momentarily, but let's go ahead and continue on with this presentation here. So now we see the breakdown. What else can you tell us about this particular study?
Yeah, so let's, so this is really the most important part, is this consumption of very highly processed food, and it's mirroring a low consumption of healthy plant-based foods. And then people may say, well, what is the problem with ultra-processed food? Why should I not feed it to my kids? Why shouldn't I eat it myself? Well, here is the problem with ultra-processed food. First of all, it's very high in added sugar. So, almost 20% of the calories can be from sugar in some of these ultra-processed foods. So just imagine that. This is just added sugar. It's not the kind of natural sugar that's found in fruits. And processed food is very high in sodium, and we know that kids are getting about 50% more sodium in their diet than they should, just like adults are. And processed foods are high in saturated fat, which increases our cholesterol level, increases our risk for cardiovascular disease. But at the same time that they're high in some of these unhealthy ingredients, they're low in healthier things, some of which Karen mentioned before. They're low in fiber, and they're low in potassium. And potassium is really important because it helps regulate our blood pressure. And what happens when we eat these ultra-processed foods is we're getting a lot of calories, but we're not getting a lot of nutrients. So people tend to consume more calories. And one research study has shown that, when people consume a diet with high amounts of processed foods, they consume about 500 additional calories per day. Now, that is quite a bit. For the average person, that's about 25% more calories than they would with a less processed diet. And that can really lead to significant health problems, including weight gain.
500 calories a day. That's 3,500 calories a week. And then you can do the math from there. That's an awful lot. How quickly would you expect, Karen, for someone to put on weight? Like, what would be the rate there? Would it be an extra pound a month, an extra pound every 2 months? What would you say the likelihood is of rapid weight gain there?
Oh, it really just depends. And I know that there's like that math equation of, 3,500 calories equals 1 pound. That's not exactly true. And so you can't, totally map out like, okay, if you're eating this many more calories, this is how much weight you're going to gain. But typically it does seem that people put on weight more gradually over time, and that by eating this way, right, like day in, day out, week in, week out, so on and so forth, that over months and years, people put on significant weight. And so often it's not even, at least in my experience in working with people, people don't necessarily gain weight, within a couple of weeks or a couple of months. It takes years. And in the same way that it is a more gradual process to put on the weight, it is a more gradual process to lose it. And so that's something else that I think is important for people to remember. And in, making healthier choices, the weight will come off, and to allow themselves some time for that to happen.
I think that during the pandemic and the lockdowns, I mean, there have been studies that come out that show that people are gaining as much as 1.5 pounds per month during the first 18 months of the pandemic. And so that puts them, a little over 20, maybe 25 pounds that the typical person had gained. I think that was a UK study. To me, that is an awful lot. And how much do you think the current pandemic has accelerated the consumption of these ultra processed foods? And just to piggyback on that already, we see where these trends were going. A lot of this study was done prior to COVID-19 hitting. And so I would think that this is really only going to accelerate what was already an unhealthy trend. Dr. Rahman, would you agree?
Absolutely. One of the things during the pandemic is people are hesitant to go out. They may be hesitant to go buy fresh produce. They may be relying more on these processed meals sort of to have at home, and they can eat them. So definitely that's playing a role in this. And people are also moving less. So it's a combination of things going on. But the weight gain is real, and food is definitely playing a key role in all of it.
All right, let's keep talking about sodium. What are some of the foods that have the most sodium? Like if we had sodium radar, right? So what's going to pop up on our screen first?
Yeah, so this is really fascinating. Something that came up in the study that we mentioned is that when we talked about these pre-prepared meals, ready-to-eat meals, the one leading this was pizza. There was a 5% increase in the amount of calories from pizza, and meaning an additional 5% of calories were now coming from pizza. And pizza is a top contributor of sodium. And again, for the reasons that we see here, the processed meat, the cheese, which is high in sodium, the crust, which is not made with whole grains, and the sauce, which likely has a lot of additives. So all of these are contributing. And the top sources we have for you here, and they're surprising to people. Bread is a top contributor, so that plays into sandwiches, and people may not realize that processed meat is loaded with sodium, and so are pre-made foods, or even Mexican food. It all depends on how it's prepared, but if it's processed, it's going to be fairly high in sodium. And especially when we start looking at like things like cheese or chicken, the sodium counts really go up.
Yeah, and Karen, we're looking at this list here. When you're working with someone and they're asking you about sodium, are they surprised at just how much they have been eating? Is that something that they had really even been cognizant about?
Not necessarily. And you can look at this list and see, like, a lot of times people aren't aware the amount of sodium in breads and rolls, which are then like so many of the ingredients that people might use to build a sandwich are on that list. But they might be aware that cheese and processed meats are high in sodium, but the bread is often something that people are surprised by, that it is something that's high in sodium. And certainly, like, if people are using some type of tracker to just be aware of what they're consuming, that can be a really great way to take notice of how much sodium you're getting in a day. And it's often a lot. On average, adult American men are getting around 4,000 milligrams a day, and women are getting around 3,000 milligrams a day. And yeah, I'd say a lot of times people really are not aware.
Well, let's go ahead and take a question really quick. This one comes to us from Sarah. She wants to know, what is the maximum amount of sodium that's okay when you're looking at buying a pre-made food? So what would your recommendation there be, Karen?
Well, do you want to advance to the next slide, Dr. Rahman?
Yeah.
So, it depends. Like, I like to think about a lot of things and like looking at the whole big picture, right? Like, what are you eating throughout the whole day? Because certainly you could be consuming a lot of fresh fruits and vegetables and whole grains, and nuts and seeds. Of course, looking at whether the nuts are salted or not, and foods that are just naturally very low in sodium. And maybe you have a little bit more room for, a particular food that is higher in sodium. But in general, this tip or trick from Jeff Novick, a really awesome dietitian, is something that I love to share with people. Like, if you think about how many calories people tend to eat in a day, about 2,200. And it's recommended that people consume under 2,300 milligrams of sodium. If you kind of align the calories in a serving of food with the sodium in that particular food, it can be just a really simple way to keep your sodium under 2,300 milligrams. And certainly, like, we can do even better than 2,300 milligrams. The American Heart Association really recommends aiming more for like 1,500 milligrams of sodium a day. And so I hope that makes sense. Like, if you see this food label here, the calories in one serving are 230, and the sodium in one serving is 160 milligrams. So that amount of sodium is less than the calories. And that can be a good tip for people to keep their total sodium for the day under 2,300 milligrams.
Now, here's a question for you. Are the terms salt and sodium interchangeable, or are we talking about two different things here?
So they're different because sodium is a mineral. It's by itself. Sodium, and salt is what we put on food, right? Like that. And it's a combination of sodium and chloride. And it's about 40% sodium and 60% chloride. So there are differences. So then when you look at, the amount of just the sodium in a particular food, that is, just taking out that sodium piece of the salt.
And we have a question from somebody else. Sasha here is wondering if either of you know of prepackaged foods that do not have an exorbitant amount of sodium in them.
Yeah, so the key here is to use the slide that Karen has just shared. Any prepackaged food is going to have this nutrition label on it, and the nutrition label is required to tell us the amount of calories per serving and the amount of sodium. So look for nutrition labels where the amount of sodium is less than the calories, and there are things out there. And it takes a little bit of detective work, but then it's so rewarding to find them. And certainly I have found pita breads, English muffins, even bagels, where the amount of sodium is less than the calories, but you do have to look for it.
I love that you put your healthy finds on your Instagram account from time to time. As a matter of fact, you got excited. I think that you found a no oil plant-based cheese not that long ago that you got super excited about and put that up there on Instagram. So good nutrition tips. And Karen, how long did it take you to get into the habit of really flipping over the item and scrutinizing that nutrition label?
Not long, personally. I love to do that. I mean, I just want to know what is in the food that I'm eating. And so especially looking at, that ingredient label to see what I'm consuming is really important to me. And I just find it actually pretty fascinating and interesting and sometimes surprising when you pick up a food that you might think is pretty healthy and read the ingredients and look at that nutrition label. You can sometimes be quite surprised.
Before we take a couple more questions, let's go ahead and talk about what a healthier diet might look like, one that is lower in sodium. I would assume that just eating the healthy plant-based diet that we talk about so often here on the exam room would be a really good way to reduce the amount of sodium that's in a person's diet.
Yeah, absolutely. And, let's not forget, this wonderful power plate by the physicians committee. So whenever I put a meal together, this is really the template I have in mind. I'm looking for 4 things on my plate: fruits, vegetables, legumes, and grains. And I don't have to have them at every single meal, but it's nice to get all four during the course of the day. And and of course, the best foods don't have any nutrition label, like apples or grapes or bananas or carrots. They're naturally low in sodium. They're naturally high in fiber, low in calories. So sometimes things may not have a label, but that doesn't mean they're not healthy.
Yeah, Karen, follow up to that. I mean, is it virtually, in your opinion, as a dietitian, impossible to eat a high sodium diet if you are eating a whole food plant-based diet?
And not adding salt to it?
Correct.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, if you are choosing a variety of whole plant foods, you can absolutely stay below 1,500 milligrams of sodium in a day, no problem, very easily.
And Dr. Rahman, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the B12 graphic that's tucked over there in the right on the right-hand side of the screen as well. Pretty important stuff here when you're talking about transitioning over.
Yeah, definitely. You know, we can get all the nutrients we need from a whole food plant-based diet, except that B12, we may not reliably get it from fortified milks or even nutritional yeast. So it's really important to take a supplement. It's inexpensive and so important.
All right, well, let's talk about sodium in terms of weight loss. We began today by looking at the ultra-processed food study and the trends in obesity. Obviously, a ton of salt, a ton of sodium in ultra-processed foods. And we see how many people in this country are struggling with their weight. Let's talk about weight loss. I know that this is something you guys are going to address. You have a wonderful 12-week weight loss program that's coming up here in just a couple of weeks. In your opinion, how much of a detriment is salt or sodium in terms of losing weight? Does a person actually have to reduce the amount of sodium in order to lose weight, or does the sodium just kind of naturally come down in a person's diet because they're no longer eating those high-fat, prepackaged meals that happen to also have a lot of sodium in them, Dr. Rahman?
Yeah, so all of that, Chuck. When people are eating a healthy, low-fat, plant-based diet with minimally processed ingredients, their sodium intake goes down significantly, and they may find themselves losing a few pounds very quickly because that's that water weight they're losing now. They're no longer retaining that water that they were. And similarly, if people then go out one night and have a high sodium meal, they may find the next day suddenly they weigh 3 pounds more. You know, and that's not body fat, that's water retention. So sodium does play a very big role in this. But really probably even bigger is just really eating a healthy low-fat plant-based diet. That's really the key to maintaining the healthy weight.
Is this something also that you address in your book that's coming out, Simply Plant-Based, which I know has a lot of great recipes in there? And I believe that everyone who signs up for the 12-week program here also gets a copy of the book. Is sodium something that you address in the book as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm really excited to share this book that's coming out in just a week or so. And, you know, my goal was to really prepare healthy meals, is to help readers prepare healthy meals that are not only whole food plant-based, but that are also low in sodium. So we use, we don't use processed ingredients, we use wholesome ingredients, but we also keep it really simple. So it's not this big ordeal to make food that's really tasty, easy, but also low in sodium, low in fat, and high in nutrients.
I hear you say that, and it's not lost on me that you have cookies on the back cover there as well. So you're kind of like welcoming those people who don't know a whole heck of a lot about a healthy plant-based diet, and they may be kind of skeptical, but who doesn't like a cookie, right?
Yeah, so those are actually chocolate chip donuts, and
What?
yeah, so they are baked chocolate chip donuts. They're delicious, and and these are all foods that my family and I eat on a regular basis. And the key is, yeah, we can enjoy our donut and we can enjoy our taco and we can enjoy our sandwiches and noodles, but we just really need to learn how to make them in a way that's healthy and nutritious, and then everyone's happy.
All right. Before we wrap up today, let's go ahead and take a couple of questions from the viewers here. Some people have sent this in. This is an interesting question, and Karen, I'll come to you for this one. Comes to us from Micah. How much water should we be drinking to flush salt out of our system?
Oh, wow. So there's really like no one specific answer to this question, Chuck. Sorry. I feel like so many of my answers are, it depends. But it does. It depends on your height. It depends on your activity level. One thing, and it also depends on like how many fruits and vegetables you're eating in a day that can, contribute a good amount of water to your overall fluid intake. And so my favorite recommendation to people is to pay attention to their urine and to monitor the color and how often they're going. And because we should be urinating frequently and, not too frequently, but, and to see that color is just a very pale yellow, that's a good sign that you're drinking enough, and an easy way to know like, okay, it's more dark, it's more concentrated, I need to drink a little bit more.
And Dr. Rahman, here's a great follow-up question, one that comes to us from Michelle. She wants to know, how does sodium make the body retain water and subsequently also then make the body work harder? So what's the connection there?
Yeah, so imagine our body's this closed balloon sac, and we need a certain amount of sodium in it. Now, suddenly we have this high sodium meal, and we have more sodium in it than our body needs, and our brain doesn't like that at all. It needs that sodium to come down, not in a minute, not in 2 days, but like immediately. So the easiest way to do that is to make us drink more. So what happens when we have a bag of chips? We reach for something to drink. What happens when we have a bowl of grapes? We're not reaching for anything to drink. And it's because the grapes are naturally high in fluid. They're naturally low in sodium, the opposite for the chips. So when we drink that water after the chips, we are now able to quickly dilute out that sodium, and our body's going to keep holding on to that extra water till our kidneys eventually excrete that sodium. And that process takes a few days. But what happens to most people is they're just continuing to consume more sodium than they need on a daily basis. So they're continuing to just hold on to this water. And why is that bad? Well, it puts extra strain on our heart. A 20-year-old with a healthy heart, they may be fine with it. But a 70-year-old with congestive heart failure, their heart really can't handle it, and the fluid backs up into their lungs. Similarly, if someone has kidney disease, their kidneys can't really get rid of that sodium, and the water will back up into their lungs, or they may get swelling in their legs. So it is a big problem, but even more immediate is it will raise our blood pressure. So if you have high blood pressure, it's really important to watch that sodium intake.
All right. And 2 questions here. Maybe we can tackle these pretty quickly here. Dr. Rahman, going to come right back to you with the question from Margaret. Boy, this is 201 level stuff. How does potassium help to counter sodium?
Yeah, so potassium and sodium move in different directions. Potassium helps reduce our blood pressure, where sodium raises it. So and most people we know are not getting enough potassium in their diet. And the reason, again, is because they're not getting enough high potassium foods like fruits and vegetables.
All right. And the final question of the day, let's get us a good one. Here we go. Interesting one from Vic. Karen, this is right up your alley. Are there any foods that are naturally high in sodium?
So there are, some vegetables, for example, celery comes to mind, that contain sodium, like just in their natural state. But the amount of sodium in whole plant foods is so minor compared to the amount of sodium in processed foods and restaurant foods. We're talking like, maybe 80 milligrams of sodium in a serving of celery, something around that, right? So very small. And our bodies are meant to take in a little bit of sodium every day. And when we're getting it from those whole food sources, then that's a very healthy and fine way to do it. So no, there aren't any, whole plant foods that are just naturally so high in sodium that they should be avoided.
All right. I think that that is a great way to wrap things up today. September 11th is the first day of class for the 12-week plant-based weight loss program. I know that this is something that you two have worked really tirelessly on. And every week, as I understand it, has a different theme. Isn't that right?
Yeah, so we have a new topic that we will share with our attendees. There's a time for everyone to check in and share their experience and share their challenges and successes. And then the best part is the peers mentoring and support. So people really get to learn from each other and connect with one another.
That's outstanding. And it begins September 11th, runs for 12 weeks after that. And if you are interested in participating, getting a jump start on those New Year's resolutions. Yes, I said New Year's because, hey, we don't have that much time left in 2021. So go ahead and knock that out already. Start September 11th. And there is a link to register right now in the show description or in the episode notes. And if you feel like you learned something today, raised your health IQ a little bit, go ahead and like this video and subscribe to the YouTube channel if you would be so kind. Dr. Vanita Rahman, dietitian Karen Smith, the fastest woman that I know. Thank you both so very much for being here today.
Thanks,
Thank
Chuck.
you, Chuck.
If your health IQ is a couple of points higher than it was a few minutes ago, go ahead and like this video or subscribe to the YouTube channel. And to take it even higher, head over to Apple Podcast or wherever you get your favorite shows. Look for The Exam Room by the Physicians Committee. Hit the subscribe button there as well and help to make your world a healthier place.